bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is going to be a fun episode to reminisce and to think about the way things could have been different, both for ourselves, Brian and I, but for you to think about what lessons and what pearls of wisdom and nuggets you would wish to share with your earlier self. I think it's an instructive mental exercise to go through, to think about not only the things we've learned, but maybe for our children or for others, what type of lessons do we want people to learn at a younger age? And Brian, mine is fairly simple when we start here. I'm just going to say, hey, Connor, 20-year-old Connor, pay attention to this thing called Bitcoin. When you hear about Bitcoin, buy a ton of it.
Yes.
You will go retire on an island, right? That's always kind of the easy one. What was the Back to the Future 2, I think, when they take the almanac back in time and then Biff can, bet on everything and become a multimillionaire. So that's what I would tell my earlier self is buy Bitcoin.
Okay. So I've been thinking about this too. And you had some really, I thought, thought-provoking things that you would tell your younger self. One of the ones that comes to mind for me is twofold. It would be ask forgiveness and give forgiveness more freely.
Okay, that's hard to do when you're that young, right? I mean,
it is. But let me share an example with you of how I came to understand why that is so important. There was a girl who I had briefly dated in high school, and I don't remember why, but for some reason I was like, I don't really want to date her anymore, so I just flat out ghosted her. And it was really rude, but to my 17-year-old mind, it was like,
big deal.
This is uncomplicated. This is non-confrontational. I don't have to go through the pain of a breakup. I just have to, just suddenly I'm not there anymore, and I don't answer calls or letters or anything. And she actually wrote to me a couple of times over the next year or so, and just never bitter or anything, but just, hey, I miss hearing from you.
Yeah.
And that bugged me. And for seriously, for like 12 years, that kind of weighed on the back of my mind. In fact, a couple of times I actually dreamt that I had run into this young lady, and when I saw her, I was like, I owe you an apology. I need to apologize because really what I did was rude, and I recognize that. And I mean, that's, you would think something like that's pretty minor, but it was on my conscience.
Yeah.
And years later, I mean like 12, maybe 15 years later, I'm doing a radio show. I'm interviewing a representative from the local college. And as I'm sitting there talking to this lady, I suddenly realize this is the girl who I ghosted. And she had changed quite a bit. We'd both changed, considerably since high school. But she could see when the recognition hit me, I could see her start smiling, and I was just like, oh, my word.
So this was in studio.
She was there. While we're on the air. Oh. So as soon as the interviews ended, I shut off the mic and just said, I've been waiting for a very long time to tell you, I am so sorry for the way that I treated you.
Wow.
And I know I was wrong, and I've actually, I've had this on my mind for a long time, so I'm so grateful I get the chance to tell you this. And then she floored me by telling me, actually, you were one of the best influences on me and one of the people who I remember with the greatest fondness from high school because, I felt like you were a good example to me. And I just was like,
wow.
Okay, so I'd been harboring all this angst over this for years, and she actually had thought well of me.
That's amazing.
But the sense of relief and the sense of burden that came off me by being able to ask for forgiveness, I've never forgotten it. And since then, I've thought about, and I don't care how careful we live our lives, we're going to wrong people at some time or another. So my advice to my younger self would be seek forgiveness early and be willing to give it as freely as possible. It's you have to experience it to understand how important that is.
And it's hard to do because I think at that kind of adolescent, young adult age, it's very, I think you bump into a lot of people more often, rub people the wrong way perhaps, but I think the natural tendency, of course, is to harbor grudges, right? And just,
sure.
Yeah, so I think that would be hard advice to implement, but I like that a lot.
Well, and some people will tell you you're weak if you apologize or if you, for that matter, don't hold a grudge.
Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you, to my younger self, I would say you would have a much happier, much more peaceful life if you just learned that lesson early on. Say I'm sorry and ask forgiveness and give forgiveness freely.
So we've each got a few things to share. I'll begin with the one that kind of is more closely connected to that one. And that is my this piece of advice to my younger self would be that positivity beats negativity. What I mean by that is when I started my political activism and outreach and education and blogging and so forth, it was very cathartic to tell people when they were wrong, right, or when I believed that they were wrong. I call this machine gun politics, where you're just, just spraying bullets everywhere, and, consequences be damned. Maybe I'll hit an innocent person or two, but man, this feels good to just, fire away with my Uzi. And, I still, a decade later, am dealing with fallout and consequences of the relationships that I damaged and the feelings that I hurt and the impressions that I left by taking that initial approach. Contrasting that against an approach that I'm not perfect at by any means, but we try and implement in our organization and with my efforts personally, and that is to assume good faith, right? Be diplomatic, be kind, recognize that you have things in common with that other person with whom you disagree on issue X, Y, or Z. And I'm not perfect. I've got certain people that I don't do this well with because they're just so dogmatic and opponent on this, one issue or whatever, where I just want nothing to do with them on anything else, even if we agree. So I'm not perfect, but I do recognize, looking back, especially in contrast to my earlier efforts, that positivity always beats negativity. You will have more success. You will feel better about yourself. You will attract more people to you, to your cause, to your beliefs and issues by being positive about them. Here's an example, right? Ron Paul, during his presidential campaign, was nicknamed Dr. No, right? And during his whole congressional service, because he would always say no to things, right? No to that pork barrel project, and no to that unconstitutional, federal agency you're trying to create. No, no, no. And so people would call him Dr. No, and he flipped it during one of his campaigns in a way that I thought was great. He said, look, it's not that we're saying no to things. There are things we say yes to. We're not saying, no to intervening in other people's countries. We're saying yes to protecting our own turf and not sending soldiers to die unnecessarily. We're saying yes to the antithesis, the opposite of the things we're saying no to. And so I think rather than being negative and critical, we can also, at least in balance, if not more so, be positive and focus on the things that matter, focus on the things that we want to pursue, the outcomes, the vision that we're going for, rather than just criticizing and saying no to this, that, and the other. So that was something that I had to, I suffered through the consequences of my actions about a decade ago when I got started, where I was very negative and critical, and now trying to repair a lot of those relationships and be able to be effective and work together with people who I didn't start off on a good foot with. And I recognize a lot more success now in our efforts by being positive, assuming good faith, being diplomatic, and working together with others on like issues, even if you disagree on other issues, rather than just this, left, right, you're right, I'm wrong, very, consolidated view of things. Life is a lot more nuanced, and that's one nugget of advice I would share with my earlier self.
I think that's really sound advice, especially from the standpoint that if you want to be an influencer, force is not the best way to achieve that influence. Mm-hmm. And as good as it feels to put somebody in their place, or at least to try to put somebody in their place, it never changes their mind.
There's no lasting value in it, right?
No.
You might win an argument, but you haven't persuaded them to change their belief set or their philosophy or their heart.
So from that standpoint, I would tell myself, focus on being a heart softener more so than a mind changer.
Huh. Interesting. What do you mean by that?
In other words, be willing to understand that they may have a differing point of view, and it may differ from yours. Offer what you believe in love. Take the hits if they don't accept it graciously, and just keep loving them and let them come to the truth on their own terms. If you do that, like you say, in a gentle or a positive manner, there will come a point where most people will say, you know what, in retrospect, I can see where you're coming from. Even if they don't change their mind, they will at least be willing to hear you out because you didn't, come gunning for them.
Interesting. I like that.
But I say that, but I struggle too, especially when I see people being, when people are being rude or being obnoxious. Boy, there's something in me that just wants to okay, I've got the perfect put down. And it takes a lot of effort not to bring that into play.
Well, and again, where we're talking about having a lasting impact, you can get someone to rationally agree with you, but when they're presented with a life experience or a circumstance that speaks to their heart in a different way, it's going to be really easy to override or forget or disregard that factoid that, changed their mind a month ago or a year ago. And so you do, I think, have to change their belief. You have to change their heart. You have to change their feelings. And as you and I think, would both agree, the best way to do that is through storytelling. You have to invite people to consider other people's experiences. You have to humanize other people. It's so easy in our society to dehumanize our opponents and not consider them as, individuals with their own beliefs and interests and everything. And so storytelling, I think, is a very effective way to achieve that.
Okay, here's another one that I would tell 20-year-old Brian.
Shoot.
Stop caring about what other people think.
So powerful.
That really is the single most liberating understanding I've come to throughout my life. And it shames me a little bit to realize how much I used to care. And I'm not just talking about, my opinions or, the clothes I wore, what I'm driving. I would agonize, people are going to judge me for this. And it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We think people are thinking about us, and we think that they're critiquing us like, it's a very narcissistic way of looking at life. Everybody's judging me. No, they're not.
Right.
They have their own concerns, and I know for a fact you're a lot happier when you follow what your own conscience and your own heart is telling you. And, this is not being cocky or being overbearing to other people. It's just simply acknowledging that I am me. There is no one else who is like me, and that's okay.
And even if there are quirks or whatever, when you own it, when you are confident, that kind of overrides and washes away any of that, oddity that people might think. This is something we're trying to talk to my 8-year-old about right now, because every, major action that he's doing, he's analyzing through the lens of what are other people going to think, right? And obviously an 8-year-old and a 20-year-old, we're talking about different things here, but I've been thinking along this same route, and it's very instructive to, as you're doing with your 20-year-old self, for me to think about the same thing and realize, oh my gosh, like so much of my youth was driven by doing what I perceived other people to want me to do or think I would be cool or I would feel included. And so, but that's easier said than done, right? I mean, because you have this natural desire, this social desire to fit in and be included. And so how do you convince your 20-year-old self to follow that path and just disregard or be okay with the consequences of maybe being left out or ostracized or whatever?
It's tough because the peer pressure is strongest, especially, from early teens to early adulthood. That's where everybody is trying to show that they're one of the cool kids. Are you familiar with the British sci-fi series Black Mirror?
I've heard about it. That's like the dystopian technology series.
It is. There's some darkness in that show, but it's also kind of lighthearted. There was an episode where everybody goes around with their smartphone and they rate each other, every person you meet throughout the day. Oh, hi, Connor. How are you? Well, I swipe over. I give you 5 stars.
Oh, boy.
But the problem is everybody is totally fake because everybody's just milking it for all they're worth. They're trying to build their social standing through this syrupy, thank you so much. Oh, it's so wonderful. And it's just as fake as can be.
Wow.
But it's the most important thing. And according to your social standing, if you're not rated at least a 4.1, you can't even come into this establishment. Oh, you wanted to get on that flight? Sorry, that's reserved for 4.2s or higher.
Wow.
And it shows how we can paint ourselves into a corner because we're seeking the approval of others. And I know you've seen this in your own life as far as there comes a point where you have to be willing to just accept people are not going to agree. Some are going to criticize. Some will like what you're doing, but it's okay. It's okay for people to not agree with you. And in fact, once you reach that point, you have this freedom to pursue what really matters most to you in a way that you can't when you're looking for that outside approval.
And so maybe a tangent off of what you recommended to your earlier self is focus more on substance rather than superficiality.
And you have to know the difference, which for a young person, that can be kind of hard.
Yeah, because you are trained, like you see everything on the surface. Everything looks cool and what Susie is wearing and what Billy is listening to. And that easier said than done, but I really like that nugget. One that I would share with my earlier self is to take more risks. When you get older, of course, you end up with a lot more commitments in life. Your risk tolerance decreases. And by that, I mean the amount of risk you are willing to assume, the the flexibility you have in your life to experience failure diminishes because you have, a spouse, you have kids, you have mouths to feed, you have to clothe them, you need to pay for, a mortgage or rent. And all of these bills and commitments begin to compound. And so as you age and as these commitments increase, so too does your desire for stability and predictability. You want the ability to fulfill those commitments with the least amount of mental energy possible. And so you want the, 9 to 5, or you want the predictable success so that you can meet those commitments and still enjoy life. Of course, then it becomes much harder to be an entrepreneur, which inherently involves risk taking. And so you have this window of opportunity when you are young. That's not to say it's completely foreclosed. People who are older, especially if you have maybe a cushion of savings, that you've accumulated that can give you kind of a ramp to jump off of and go start a different business or assume a risk later in life. And so those are still definite possibilities. But you have this window of opportunity, right? And the thing that I struggle with, or that I'm so disenchanted by, which is a little bit connected to the other, this third one nugget of wisdom I'll share in a minute to my earlier self, is that our system, this public schooling system, our culture, does not adequately prepare individuals to take that type of risk. We're putting them on a conveyor belt saying, go to high school, go to college, go get a job, beginning to end, point A, point B. And nowhere in there are we preparing them to go assume risks, start a business, be an entrepreneur. People who follow this process are discovering it largely on their own. They're seeing other people who have done it. They're getting mentors. They're taking the risk on their own. They're reading books about, historical figures, whatever. And these people are just kind of launching off on their own to do it without a support system, I think, that has really gotten them ready and give. I'm trying to think of the meme that I see like every year during tax time. It's like, I'm so grateful that in high school I learned how to prepare my taxes. All those tax preparation classes really paid off, right?
Right.
And so we're not like preparing people to adult. We're not preparing people to assume that risk. And so what I would tell my earlier self is to just, learn how to and definitely take advantage of taking more risks. Who knows what I could have accomplished 5-10 years earlier in life had I been willing to be much more aggressive more earlier rather than just following that natural conveyor belt.
And as a part of what you have just stated, my advice to myself, my younger self, would have been stop fearing failure.
Good point.
Because, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, I care what other people think. Well, what if I fail? What if they see me fail? What's everybody going to think? It doesn't matter. You look at anyone who has accomplished anything that is noteworthy or has created a better world in some way. I guarantee that along the way to that accomplishment, they failed and failed and failed again. Mm-hmm. And they learned from every single one of those mistakes. They never let that failure be the stopping point. It was just simply like, oh, okay, I need to pick a different route. And that's what they did. And that's how they didn't succeed in spite of their failures. They succeeded because of them. And that is a tough lesson to learn. I was very failure averse. Don't take any chances. So like you, I would encourage my younger self, understand the risks, take the risks, and if you fail, just accept that is part of life and keep moving forward. You're not done till you're done.
And part of that risk aversion is to not follow the path that everyone else has followed, that society expects you to follow. So my third and final little nugget for my earlier self is to avoid college. I went to college because it's what you do. I had no awareness of anything different. It was the natural progression of one thing to the other, assuming the debt and learning more about, things I didn't care about, biology and, the epistemology of European medieval philosophy or whatever. Like, sure, maybe I'll spend an evening on Wikipedia, like out of curiosity, learning about this stuff. But to take a course and have your overall performance level subjected to how you did in these random subjects, and then, the culture and the everything else. Like, for me, I went to college because that's just what you did. I, again, had no understanding of anything different. And looking back now, while college is a fun experience in a lot of ways and there's a great social element to it, you have the cost. You have the wasting away of 4 of the most opportune years to take risks and to go out and do something. Now, a lot of people need the educational support and structure that the higher education, quote unquote, institution or system can provide. That's not to say college should be abolished, but I wish that I had been exposed to alternatives. I wish that I had been shown a way to get into the job market, to begin doing what I was doing, which at the time was web development. For the first 10, 12 years of my career, I was a web developer. And I was self-taught. I learned this stuff on my own, so much so that in a few of my college courses, the professor would just have me teach, not for pay or for credit or anything. He was like, hey, Connor, you want to give this lecture? Oh, yeah, sure, right? Because I was learning this stuff on my own outside of college as a function of getting clients and having to learn how to do these things. And looking back now, I don't think I really needed college. And so I spent the money. I was forced to pump and dump all this information that I didn't care about just because I had to get tested on it. I wasted years of opportunity where I could have potentially, grown a really thriving business had I just jumped right into the market. I would tell my earlier self, at least be aware of opportunities. Not necessarily don't go to college, avoid it at all costs, but to say, be aware of other opportunities, weigh them against your skill set, your risk tolerance, your fear of failure. I think we do a disservice by just leaving these kids on a conveyor belt and not showing them, like we did that interview earlier with Isaac Morehouse, right, with Praxis, like these great opportunities that increasingly exist to get educated, get trained outside of the college system. I
wholeheartedly agree with you, and that came at some expense. I stepped off the career path at about age 40. And essentially started pursuing personal mission, and I cannot believe the difference in quality of life. It's something I wish I had understood much earlier. Right now, my 17-year-old son is 1 year away from graduating high school, and he's already getting the military recruitment stuff in the mail.
Oh boy.
Colleges are reaching out to him. Hey, come and attend here, and I'm telling him, because he's saying I don't know what I want my career to be. And I tell him, don't focus so much on what your career is going to be. Figure out what your heroic journey is and get started on that.
Yeah.
Now, you have to earn a living along the way, but if you can figure out a way to do that as part of your unique personal heroic journey, your life is going to mean so much more to you. Totally. And the earlier you get started on it, the greater magnitude of impact you're going to have.
Yeah. Later in life, when I figured out what it was for me, I had to undergo a bit of a painful transition to go from being a web developer to doing what I am now. And so, yeah, I am a bit jealous of the people who got started earlier following the path that they had figured out. And, of course, it's hard. Yet it takes time and exposure, right, to a lot of different fields of interest and organizations and ideas to finally figure out what clicks and what your heroic journey is. I really like the way you put it. That I think this is an interesting exercise to go through, not only to maybe test our own progression, how far we've come in our lives and progressed away from the way things were, but again, like for someone like you that has a child that's nearing this age, for someone like myself with younger kids, it's instructive to think, okay, what are the things I want to be telling my kids about and helping them understand, so that they can kind of learn from the, not mistakes of the past, but so that they can kind of build on a foundation that we give them and be even better than we were.
As weird as it sounds, if you were to sit down at any age and write out your obituary and just use your imagination, how would you want to be remembered? What would you want people to remember you for doing? That will tell you a lot about where your interests lie, where your heart lies. And of course, it's subject to change over the years.
Mm-hmm.
You gain clarity as you have experience. But that's an exercise that I've done before, and as macabre as it may sound, it really opens up a window into, what matters most to me.
It was a fun conversation, guys. Thanks for sticking around. Show notes page for today. We'll link to a couple of those episodes that we mentioned, like the Isaac Morehouse one with Praxis. Show notes is societyinthestate.com/81. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't. Share the podcast with your friends. We've got several fun guests lined up in the episodes ahead, so stick around and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.